They said no Apache warrior would dare take her as his wife. They said something was wrong with her. Wrong in a way nobody spoke of. Hidden beneath that bright, heavy blanket, the white man said yes. Before he ever saw her face, Arizona territory. The year was 1882. A blood-red sun hung over the canyon walls. In an Apache camp at the edge of the desert, two old women lifted the edge of the blanket. He held his breath, bracing for a scar, a deformity, some curse that could not be undone. The blanket fell to the ground. He stood there, mouth slightly open, because the woman before him was the most beautiful he had ever seen. But something in those amber eyes, cold, sharp, measuring, froze the blood inside him. A whole tribe had turned its back on her. There had to be a reason. And on the first night in his wooden ranch house, when a slow creak came from the beams above his head, they say she was turned away by every warrior in the tribe. Not one Apache man would take her as his wife. The white man who said yes had no idea what waited. He did not know what he was walking into. Neither did she. Before we get to the woman, we must first find the man. To find him, we go back to Arizona territory. The year was 1882. The month was September. A dry canyon with no name on any map. That is where this story begins. Ethan Miller was 25 years old that September. He had been riding for 3 full days without rest. He was not the kind of man who sought trouble. He was not the kind who chased glory or adventure. He had a small cattle ranch north of Tucson. He had 20 head that needed water badly and soon. He had a horse named Luther, old and solid and reliable, and he carried a quiet that had followed him all the way from Oklahoma. He never talked about Oklahoma. He had decided long ago that not talking was easier. He was cutting through Apache land because the route was shorter. The longer way around added 3 full days to any journey. 3 extra days mattered badly when your cattle were thirsty and waiting. So he cut through, not because he was brave or foolish, because he was tired, and tired men choose the shorter road. The September desert sun came straight down without any mercy at all. The red earth threw the heat right back up. A man caught between the sky and the ground felt cooked from both directions. Ethan had his hat pulled low over his face. His bandana was pulled tight up to his nose. He watched Luther's ears for any sign of trouble approaching. A horse's ears were better than any paid scout. Luther's ears stayed easy for 2 hours on that canyon trail. Then they stopped being easy. That was when Ethan heard it, a sound, small and barely there beneath the desert wind. He pulled Luther to a full stop. He sat still in the saddle and listened hard. Wind moved across the red rock of the canyon wall above him. A hawk called somewhere distant and high in the pale sky. Then, beneath all of it, came something that did not belong there. A child was crying somewhere, down inside that dry canyon. Ethan swung down from the saddle without thinking about it once. He moved toward the sound on foot, leading Luther behind him. The canyon walls were close and red on both sides. The dry wash at the bottom was cracked like old pottery left too long. Sage clung to the rock face in sparse and determined little clumps. The heat inside the canyon was worse than out on the open trail. He found her 40 feet in, pressed against a large boulder. She was perhaps 8 years old, Apache by her dress and the careful pattern of her clothing. Her lips were cracked, white and dry as old paper. Her eyes were open but not fully focused on anything real. She had been in that canyon far too long already. Another hour in that heat would have finished her for good. Ethan did not stop to calculate. He knelt beside her and pulled his canteen from his belt. "Hey," he said, keeping his voice low and soft. "I've got water." She flinched hard at his voice and pressed herself deeper into the rock. "I know," he said quietly. "I know. But you need to drink." He held the canteen out slowly, the way you offer something fragile to someone frightened. He gave her all the time she needed to look him over and decide. She had enormous dark eyes that studied him with great and patient care. Then slowly she reached out and took the canteen from his hand. He let her drink until she had enough. He tore a strip from his old bandana and wet it with the last water. He pressed the cool cloth gently to her burning forehead. Her skin was hot enough to worry any man with any sense left. He did not know whose child she was. He did not know how far she had wandered from her people. He knew only one thing with complete and certain clarity. Leaving her, there was not something his hands would allow him to do. He lifted her carefully and walked her back toward Luther. That was when the western sky turned the wrong color entirely. It came from the west like a moving wall of earth, a rolling curtain of red and brown dust 300 feet high. It swallowed the canyon walls and turned the sun into a pale shadow. Ethan had seen dust storms before in this desert country. He had never once seen one moving anywhere near this fast. He ran the last 10 yards back to Luther with the girl in his arms. The horse was trembling badly, his eyes rolling white with fear. "Easy," Ethan said. He was telling himself the very same thing. A shallow overhang broke from the canyon wall just ahead of him. Barely more than a shelf of rock jutting 3 feet outward. It was not much shelter against what was bearing down on them, but it was the only shelter anywhere within reach. He pressed himself and the girl tight against the stone face. He pulled his coat up and over them both as fully as he could. The storm hit. The sound was enormous and unlike anything quiet or human. The wind screamed through that canyon like something alive and looking for a fight. The girl buried her face hard against Ethan's chest. She grabbed his shirt with both small fists and held on with everything she had. He held her back just as tight and did not let go. They stayed like that for nearly a full hour. When the storm passed, and the air went still again, everything had changed color. Fresh red dust coated every surface of the canyon around them. The air smelled like the inside of an old clay pot left in the sun. The girl pulled back slowly and looked up at his face. Her eyes had cleared considerably from the terrible state they were in before. She said something in Apache, one short sentence, soft and direct. He could not understand a single word of it. He nodded anyway. "Okay," he said, "let's get you home now." He lifted her onto Luther's back and mounted up behind her. They rode toward the thin thread of smoke visible in the far distance. Apache campfires, small against the enormous desert sky. He was thinking about his cattle and the water they needed back home. He was thinking about the fence on the north side that needed work. He was thinking about how much of the day he had now lost. He was not thinking at all about what the chief might say. He should have been thinking about exactly that. The Apache camp came to life the moment upon Ethan rode in from the east. He heard the shout first. A woman's voice, high and sharp, full of something urgent and relieved. Then people were running from every direction at once. The girl was lifted from his arms before he had fully brought Luther to a stop. He stood holding the reins while the child was carried away quickly. Women checked her over with fast and practiced hands. Children gathered at a careful distance and watched the white man without moving. Warriors stood near their horses and kept their faces very still. Nobody came near Ethan. Nobody spoke to him directly or offered anything. He stood in the middle of that camp and waited. The man who came to meet him was not especially tall, but he moved through the space around him in a particular way. People stepped back without being asked as he passed among them. He was perhaps 60 years old. His face was like weathered sandstone, carved by decades of desert sun. His eyes were sharp and perfectly still. "Missing nothing at all, you found her," the man said. His English was careful and precise. "In the East Canyon," Ethan said. "She had been there a while. I am Chaska," the man said. "She is my granddaughter." Ethan told him his own name. They shook hands the way two men do when trust is still being decided. "Come," Chaska said. "We will talk inside." Inside the chief's tent, the air was cooler and smelled of smoke and old herbs. Coffee appeared, strong and dark, and unlike anything Ethan had ever tasted. He drank it because refusing seemed like the wrong thing to do. Chaska sat across from him and was quiet for a very long time. Ethan waited. He had learned that rushing a man's silence rarely leads anywhere useful. Then the chief spoke. The blood of my blood was in danger today, he said carefully. You brought her back to us, in our way. This is a debt that cannot go unpaid. Our tradition demands it be settled with honor. Honor requires it above all other things. Ethan shook his head once. I don't need anything, Chief. Seeing the girl safe is enough for me. Chaska looked at him steadily across the small fire between them. That is a generous thing to say, he replied quietly. But our tradition does not allow generosity to cancel a debt. He paused and looked at his own hands. I have something to offer you. Something specific and real. Another pause. Longer this time. But I must be fully honest with you before I say what it is. This is something that no one has yet been willing to accept. Ethan's stomach pulled tight and uncomfortable. He thought of cursed land. He thought of diseased horses and fouled water sources. He had heard of strange arrangements made in strange desert places before. I have a daughter, Chaska said. Her name is Nahimana. She is 20 summers old. She is strong and healthy and sharp-minded in all things. He stopped. The pause that followed had considerable weight inside it. No warrior in this tribe has agreed to marry her. The tent went completely quiet. Ethan said nothing. He was running through every possible explanation as fast as he could. A hidden illness that worked slowly from the inside. A violent temper that frightened men off in time. Something gone wrong inside her that had not yet shown itself on the outside. Whatever it was, it had to be serious and real and specific. You may refuse, Chaska said. There is no dishonor in refusing. But if you refuse, you must leave these lands and never return again. Our honor cannot hold if you stay after saying no to this. These are our customs. I cannot change them for any man. Ethan thought about his ranch and the route he needed to go home. He thought about 3 extra dangerous days through bad canyon country every single time. He thought about what happened to cattle left without water in an Arizona summer. He thought about what sense looked like from where he was sitting right now. He thought about asking to meet her before deciding. He almost said it aloud. Then he looked at Chaska's face and understood. The answer was already settled. Yes or no, the chief said. Now, this moment, Ethan's heart was doing something strange and urgent in his chest. 25 years old and never married. Always telling himself there was plenty of time for that later. He kept pushing later further and further down the road. He thought of the girl in the canyon, her small fists gripping his shirt like he was the only solid thing left in the world. He thought of the route home. He said yes. Chaska called out a single order in Apache. 2 elderly women came out from a tent across the open ground. Between them walked a figure covered entirely in a bright and heavy blanket, red and yellow and deep blue all together. It covered everything from the crown of her head down to her feet. Ethan felt his legs go uncertain beneath him right then. He steadied himself hard. He told his face to stay completely neutral. He had said yes, and he was going to honor that. Whatever was under that blanket, he would deal with it straight. Scar, deformity, something worse, he could not yet imagine. He was going to stand here and not flinch. He had made a deal, and he kept his word. That was something he still had. One of the old women reached up and took the edge of the blanket. Ethan breathed in slowly. The blanket fell. He blinked, then blinked again. He had braced every muscle in his body for something terrible. And what stood before him in the morning light of that Apache camp? What stood there and looked back at him with complete composure was the most beautiful woman he had seen in all his 25 years of living. Hair black as a night, without a single star, falling straight past her waist. Her features were clean and precisely made as good stonework. High cheekbones and a firm and perfectly shaped mouth. Skin the deep and warm color of good earth after a soaking rain. She wore a traditional Apache dress, and her figure beneath it was strong and slender. No marks, no scars, nothing wrong. Nothing wrong at all. Ethan stood there with his mouth slightly open. He felt like a man who had spent a full hour bracing for a bad fall, and then discovered the floor was perfectly solid after all. Then she looked at him. Her eyes were dark amber, almost brown, catching the desert light beautifully. They did not look at him the way a woman looks at a stranger she is meeting. They looked at him the way a person looks at a problem to be solved. Flat, patient, measuring carefully. Not afraid at all, not curious. She was simply looking at him with those extraordinary eyes, and she appeared to find him entirely unremarkable. Ethan had never been so completely evaluated and so quickly dismissed. "Naimana," Chaska announced clearly. "This is Ethan Miller. He saved your niece from the canyon today. He is now your husband." Nahimana held Ethan's gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked away. The ceremony happened the following morning at first light. The sun came up red over the eastern ridge of the canyon. Chaska stood before them with a length of braided leather cord in his hands. He wrapped it once around Ethan's right wrist and Nahimana's left wrist. He spoke words in Apache that Ethan could not follow at all. His voice was low and formal and carried the weight of very old things. Then he cut the cord with a clean single stroke of his knife. He pressed the cut cord into Ethan's open palm. "Now you are one," Chaska said quietly. He looked at Ethan with those still and sharp eyes. "Take care of her. White man, she is worth more than you know." During the entire ceremony, Nahimana had not looked at Ethan once. Not when the cord was tied around their wrists. Not when the old words were spoken. Not when the cord was cut. She looked straight ahead at a point somewhere beyond all of them. When it was done, she was already walking toward the horses. She mounted in one single fluid motion that took no effort to witness, no hands on the saddle horn, no pause or hesitation of any kind. Ground to seat in one clean arc that came from a lifetime spent riding, she did not look back to check if he was following her. Ethan stood there, holding a short piece of braided leather cord. He looked at it lying in his open palm for a moment. Then he mounted Luther and followed her west into the morning. They rode for 2 hours in absolute silence. The desert moved past them without any comment. Red rock and pale scrub brush and wide open blue sky above. A hawk made long lazy circles somewhere high overhead. The trail was narrow and the dust rose under the horses' feet. Ethan watched the straight back of her head and thought hard. He tried twice to open a conversation between them. "Nahimana, I'm sorry if this isn't what you wanted at all. I'll do right by you, that I can promise you. Nothing." Her eyes stayed on the trail ahead of them. Her back was perfectly straight and entirely still. "You could at least look at me now and then. I'm not going to disappear on you. Nothing." He let it go after that. He told himself there were worse things than a quiet companion on a long trail. He told himself she would talk when she was ready. He told himself a lot of different things during that long desert ride. He did not entirely believe any of them. Then she stopped her horse without any warning at all. She was off the animal, before he had registered that she had even pulled up. She knelt in the red trail dust and pressed her flat hand to the ground. Her fingers moved across the surface with slow and deliberate precision. She read the ground the way a careful scholar reads a very difficult page. She studied the depth and angle and direction of the marks in the dust. She leaned close and examined something that only she could see clearly. 30 seconds. Maybe a few less. She stood up cleanly. She pointed west without looking at him. She mounted her horse and turned off the main trail ahead of them. She moved in a new direction without explaining a single thing. Ethan looked down the main trail stretching ahead of them. He looked at her retreating back, already moving away. He followed. An hour later, they came around a long and rocky ridge. The main trail was visible below them, bending into a narrow cut in the rock. High canyon walls rising on both sides of it. No way out once a rider was inside that cut. And on the soft ground at the entrance to the cut, Ethan saw what she had read, deep and restless marks from many horses waiting there. A camp that had been in place a long time, and left not long ago. Someone had been waiting in that cut with patience. Patient and quiet, waiting for exactly 2 riders coming from the east. Ethan stared at those marks for a long moment. Then he looked at the back of Nahimana's head, already moving on without him. He said nothing. There was nothing adequate enough to say. They reached the ranch on the evening of the third day out. The sun was going down behind the western ridge in deep layers of color. The ranch appeared below them as they came over the last low rise, a two-room house built from pine timber, gone gray with weather and time, a stable with 6 stalls and a roof that wanted attention, a barn that leaned just slightly east but had not given way yet, a corral where 4 horses stood watching them arrive with mild interest. Ethan pulled up outside the front gate. "This is your home now," he said. He said it the way a man says something he is not fully sure of yet. Nahimana did not respond. She was already studying the property with that same measuring expression. Her eyes moved across the roof line of the main house. They moved to the pitch of the barn roof and the angle of it. They moved to the condition of the corral posts and the gate hinges. She was cataloging everything in front of her without rushing. Then she dismounted and led her horse to the stable, without being told where it was. Ethan followed her in. She went through each stall, with the eyes of someone who has worked many stables. She ran her hand along each wall and checked the grain of the wood. She pressed against every hinge of every stall door and tested their hold carefully. She gathered a handful of stored hay and let it fall through her fingers. She smelled it and let it go. Then her eyes went up to the ceiling. The 2 main beams that ran the full width of the stable above them. She looked at them for a long and careful moment. Then she looked at Ethan. Then back at the beams. She shook her head slowly once. "Those beams are fine," Ethan said. "I put them in myself. 2 years back." She looked at him with an expression that was not quite pity and not quite contempt. It lived somewhere uncomfortable between those 2 things. Then she picked up her travel bag and walked out of the stable. The message was plain enough. She had warned him. What he did with that warning was his own affair entirely. Inside the house, Ethan showed her around in less than 4 minutes. There was not much to show her. 2 rooms, a kitchen that also served as the main living space, a fireplace built from riverstone, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a sofa against the far wall where he slept most nights. 1 bedroom with a better mattress than the sofa. "You take the bedroom," he said. "I'll be fine out here. I've slept on this sofa plenty of nights." He kept talking after that moment. He said more words than he needed to by a considerable amount. He said he had no expectations of her at all. He said she could take all the time she needed to settle in here. He said the things that nervous men say when the silence grows too large to cross. Nahimana walked into the bedroom without looking back at him. She set her travel bag down on the floor. She closed the door behind her, not with anger, not with force of any kind. Just closed it, the way you close something you are done addressing for now. Ethan stood in the kitchen and looked at that closed door for a while. Then he sat down on the sofa and looked at the wall instead. Night came down over the desert fast, the way it always does in September. The air outside dropped 20 degrees in under an hour. Inside, the house settled and creaked softly in the cooling dark. Ethan lit 1 candle and sat with it burning low on the table. He could not sleep. He lay on the sofa and listened to everything around him, the desert insects building their long nightly chorus outside. Horses moving quietly in the stable he had built with his own hands. The occasional far-off cry of a coyote working the dark hills. His own mind going around and around on the same worn question. What was wrong with her? There had to be something specific and real. Men do not walk away from a woman like that without a deep and solid reason. She was young and strong and healthy, and extraordinarily beautiful. So what was the thing? What was the thing that every warrior in that tribe had seen and walked away from? He thought about her eyes on the trail, the 30 seconds she had spent reading the ground, the ambush they had both avoided because of what she saw in the dust. He thought about the beams she had shaken her head at in the stable. He thought about a woman that an entire tribe had looked at and refused. None of it added up to any explanation he could hold in his hands. He lay there for a long time, in the low candlelight of his own kitchen. At some point, he reached into his shirt pocket. He pulled out a small photograph that lived there permanently, creased badly from years of folding and unfolding it, a man who looked enough like him to be unmistakably family. Older, broader across the shoulders. Laughing at something off to the left of the camera frame, Ethan looked at the photograph for a while in the low light. The last time he had spoken to his brother, they had argued badly. He could not remember now what it had started over. Something small and stupid and not worth remembering clearly. The kind of argument that only becomes significant when you look back too late. He had picked up his bag and walked out the door, the way he had always done when things got difficult and the walls closed in. His brother had called after him from the porch steps, "Ethan, don't go this time." He had gone. 3 weeks later, a letter reached him in Tucson. He read it standing at the post office counter with strangers all around him on all sides. His brother was dead. A land dispute had turned violent the way those things do out here. His brother had been there alone to defend what was theirs. Ethan had not been there. He had been 3 weeks west in Tucson, starting over somewhere new. Telling himself there was always time to sort things out later. He put the photograph away in his shirt pocket. He lay back on the sofa and looked at the ceiling of his ranch house. He thought about the name at the center of that old letter, Wade Calloway. He had not said that name out loud since the letter arrived. He did not say it now either. The candle burned down to its end. The dark settled fully and completely over the house. On the other side of the closed bedroom door, total silence. Outside, a coyote called once from the direction of the dry wash south of the barn. Then the whole night went quiet again. Ethan Miller lay in the particular dark of a man carrying too much alone, and he tried to close his eyes and could not, and tried again. In the morning, Ethan came off the sofa to a smell he did not recognize. Something cooking over the fireplace grate, herbs and roots, and something slow-simmered and warm beneath it all. A smell foreign to that kitchen and not entirely unpleasant. He sat up and looked at the table. Breakfast was already made and laid out with care. The coffee was his own beans in his own pot, made exactly the way he drank it. He had never told her how he liked his coffee. He turned that fact over in his mind for a moment before moving. Nahimana was not in the house. He looked out the back window and found her immediately. The rocky ground behind the house had always been useless. Red stone and packed earth, the kind of ground that grows nothing useful. He had never once tried to plant anything there. Nahimana had already cleared an area of stone the size of a small room. She was on her knees in the exposed dirt, planting seeds with both hands. Her movements were precise and deliberate, following a plan only she could read. She had been in this house for less than 12 hours. She had not spoken a single word to him since the camp. She did not know this land, or its layout, or the names of a single horse. Yet she had made breakfast, learned his coffee, and started reshaping dead ground. Ethan stood at the back window and watched her for a while. He thought about the beams she had shaken her head at. He thought about the 30 seconds of reading the dust on the trail. He thought about a woman who had made herself invisible for so long. She had done it so thoroughly that even her presence barely left a mark. He poured his coffee. He sat down alone at the table. He ate the breakfast she had made. It was good. Better than anything he cooked himself. Herbs he did not recognize gave the food a depth his own cooking never had. He sat with it and ate slowly and looked at the closed back door. He thought, "This woman does not waste a single motion she makes. Every movement has a purpose he may not yet understand." He thought, "I do not know what is wrong with her, but whatever it is nothing I was prepared to find here." After breakfast, he went outside and found her still at work in the ground. She was working the soil with a narrow tool he had not seen before. Her movements were unhurried and completely exact. The same focused quality she brought to everything, now turned on dead ground. "Good morning," he said. She did not look up. The food was very good. Better than anything I make myself by a long stretch. Nothing. He stood there for a moment with his coffee cup in his hand. "I'll be working the north fence today, if you need anything," he said. "Help yourself to whatever is in the house." Still nothing. He nodded to himself and went to get the fence tools. He spent the morning on the north fence under a hard September sun. The posts needed resetting, and 2 rails had broken over the past winter. Slow work done alone. He checked on her twice from a distance during the morning. Both times she was exactly where he had left her. Working the ground with the same unhurried and patient focus. By noon she had cleared twice the space she had started with at dawn. By evening she had cleared nearly 4 times as much. She had worked the full day without a visible break of any kind. That evening at dinner, she sat across from him at the table. She had made the meal herself again without asking. Different from the morning, but equally careful in its preparation. He ate it and said, "Thank you." She said nothing and looked at her plate. After dinner, she cleared the dishes with quick and efficient movements. Then she went to the bedroom and closed the door, just like the night before. Ethan sat alone at the table with the last of his coffee. He looked at the closed bedroom door. He looked at the chair across from him, where she had been sitting. The chair was pushed back in exactly as it had been before dinner. No real trace left of anyone having sat there at all. He thought about what it costs a person to make themselves that invisible. He thought about doing that for years. He thought about what you become when you do it for long enough. He did not have a full answer yet. But he was beginning to understand that the question was important, more important than the one he had been asking, and larger than he had first supposed. Outside, the desert night settled over the ranch in full and quiet dark. Stars came out in numbers that only a desert sky can produce. The coyotes started up somewhere to the south. The horses were easy and quiet in the stable. Ethan Miller sat at the table he had built with his own hands. In the house he had built with his own hands. In the life he had put together alone in Arizona territory, and understood, slowly and without great comfort, that the question he was carrying, the question of what was wrong with the woman now in his bedroom, was not the right question at all. He just could not yet see clearly what the right question was. A week passed, then most of another one after it. The days found a rhythm, not the rhythm Ethan was used to living. Something different and harder to name precisely. Like a new sound being played in the same room as a familiar one. He kept waiting for it to become recognizable. It kept remaining something he could only feel, not name. She rose before the sun every single morning. He never heard her rise from sleep. She was simply already awake and gone before he opened his eyes. Breakfast appeared on the table without announcement. Coffee was always made exactly the way he drank it. The house was a little cleaner than it had been the night before. Then she was outside, always working, always moving with a purpose he had not been told. The garden behind the house grew at a rate that seemed unreasonable. Deep green leaves in 3 long rows against the red and rocky soil. Plants he did not recognize and could not name from memory. She had found some arrangement between them that made each one help the others. In ground that had never successfully grown a single useful thing before, he asked her about it once. "How are you getting things to grow back there?" She looked at him briefly, just once. "My mother," she said. 2 words. Then she went back to what she was doing without further comment. He filed that away carefully. The way she said those 2 words had a particular quality he noticed every time. Not grief exactly, and not pride exactly. Something between those 2 things that did not have a good word in his language. A door mostly closed, but not completely sealed. On the 4th morning, he woke before dawn to a sound from the stable. He pulled his boots on fast and went out with the lantern burning. He was thinking predator. Something in the corral or after his chickens in the dark. What he found instead was Nahimana. She was crouched beside Luther's left rear leg in the pale lamplight. Her fingers were working with complete and careful precision around the old horse's hoof. Luther was standing completely and utterly still. This was the horse that had thrown Ethan himself twice from the saddle, twice during attempts to examine that very hoof. The horse that went nervous and unpredictable the moment anyone touched his feet, standing still as a fence post now under Nahimana's steady hands. She had something pinched between two fingers, a thorn, dark and very fine, buried deep enough in the soft tissue that it had been completely invisible. The kind that would have worked its way further and over without help. She held it up briefly in the lantern light. Then she opened a small cloth pouch hanging from her belt. Inside was a green paste of ground herbs, with a smell like pine and something sharper beneath it. She applied it in one smooth motion. She wrapped the hoof lightly with a strip of clean cloth. She stood up. Luther turned his great head and pressed his nose against her shoulder gently. She let him do that, just for a moment. She simply allowed it. I tried to find something in that hoof a dozen times at least, Ethan said from the doorway. His voice came out quieter than he intended it to. He never let me close enough to do anything about it. Nahimana picked up her small pouch and walked past him out of the stable. She did not answer. He stood there with Luther in the lamplight and thought about what he had just seen. Either she was the most gifted person he had ever watched work in his life, or this desert land was doing something strange to his ability to judge. He was leaning hard toward the first possibility by now. The days continued their rhythm. She repaired the corral fence, using techniques he had not seen before. Posts set at angles that looked wrong and held better than anything he had built. She repaired the barn roof section that had been leaking since the spring. She did it in a single afternoon, working from the inside without a ladder. He watched her from a distance sometimes and could not always follow what she was doing, only that it worked. Only that what she touched stayed fixed. The ranch began to carry a different quality. Not larger, not newer. More settled somehow. More like a place being properly understood by someone who cared about getting it right. He tried to talk to her every day. Every day she gave him one word back. Or two. Or none at all. The cattle looked good this morning. Silence. I'll need to go into town next week for supplies. A nod. One nod. Do you need anything from town? A long pause. Then, thread, one word and nothing more. He bought the thread. He did not know what kind she wanted. He bought 3 different kinds and set all of them on the table without any comment. She looked at all 3. She took one spool. She put the other 2 back into his hand. She went to her room. He stood there holding 2 spools of the wrong thread and said nothing. He thought, "We are learning each other's language here," he thought. "It is going very slowly," he thought. "I am not sure I mind that as much as I thought I would." On the 8th day, the neighbor came to call. Tom Harker was broad and 45 years old, and carried the particular confidence of deep local roots. He rode up on his gray mare, with a carefully casual excuse for visiting. He wanted to borrow a length of chain. Ethan went to find it anyway. While Ethan was in the barn looking for the chain, Tom stood in the yard. Nahimana came around the corner of the house from the garden side. She had a handful of pulled weeds in her right hand. They saw each other at the same time, and both stopped for a moment. Tom looked at her, the way a man looks at a rumor he is confirming with his own eyes. Nahimana looked at him the way she looked at everything. Quickly, completely. Then away. When Ethan came back with the chain, Tom took it. He said, without lowering his voice enough to matter, "I heard you got yourself a wife." "Apache, they're saying all over town." "That's right," Ethan said. Well, Tom turned the chain over in his hands. "I'd be careful if I were you, my friend. Those people are strange in their ways. She'll take what she needs from you, and then she'll move on. That's just the way they are." Ethan felt something rise in his chest that was not patience and not calm. "Tom, I'd appreciate it if you headed on home now." Tom raised his free hand. I'm just saying what folks are already saying around this county. Having one of them out here with you isn't going to make life simple. People in town are talking about you. Then they've got something to do with their afternoons, Ethan said. Good afternoon, Tom. Tom mounted up and rode out with the chain. He looked back once at Nahimana before he went over the rise. Ethan turned around. Nahimana was standing at the corner of the house. She had heard every single word of it. She stood in the full afternoon sun with the weeds still in her hand. Her face was exactly what it always was, still, unreadable, giving nothing away, but she had heard it. Every word. Ethan opened his mouth. He wanted to say something that mattered and meant something real. He could not find words worth the air they would cost. She turned and went back around the corner of the house without a sound. That night she cooked something entirely different. Not the spare and functional meals she had been making. Not food that only existed to fuel the next day's work. Something else was on the table that evening. An Apache stew that filled the small kitchen with a deep and layered smell. Herbs and slow-cooked meat and something long-simmered that he had no name for. He sat down and ate it and did not speak for a long time. Because it was the best thing he had tasted in months, and he knew it. And he did not want to break whatever had brought it into being. This is remarkable, he said finally. He meant it precisely. Nahimana sat across from him and looked at her bowl. She did not answer. But she did not get up immediately either. She stayed at the table longer than she had any other night. She kept her eyes down and ate slowly. Ethan thought carefully about what this meal was. It was a response to what had happened in the yard that afternoon. Not words, not explanation. Just this meal, made with real care, set down in front of him in the hour after someone had been ugly. He thought, she communicates in a language I have not learned yet. He thought, that language is worth the time it takes to learn. That night he lay on the sofa, and the memories came. They came the way they always did when he was tired enough to stop guarding against them. When his guard was down and the dark was full around him. The last time he had spoken to his brother, they had argued hard and long. He could not recall now what it had started over. Something small. Something that would not survive a week's honest examination. The kind of fight that only becomes significant when it is the last one you ever have. He had picked up his bag without saying anything more. He had walked out the door. The way he had always done when things got difficult. His brother had called from the porch steps behind him, Ethan. Don't go this time. He had gone. 3 weeks later, the letter caught up with him in Tucson. He read it standing at the post office counter with strangers all around him. His brother was dead. The land dispute had gone the way those things always go eventually. When one side decides that paperwork is slower than other methods. His brother had been there alone when it happened. Ethan had not been there. He had been 3 weeks west in Tucson, building something new for himself. Telling himself the whole time that there was time to sort things out later. He lay on the sofa in the dark and held that fact inside him. Held it the way you hold something you cannot put down and cannot keep forever. In the morning, the breakfast was made and on the table. The garden was already being worked in the pale early light. Nahimana was exactly where she always was at dawn. The work continued, and so did the silence between them. And slowly, carefully, so did something else. The second week gave way to the third, and the ranch kept changing, not in ways that could be pointed to on any single day. Quietly and steadily, the way water changes stone over a long time. You do not see the change happening. Then one morning you look, and the stone has become something different. The cattle moved through the south pasture easier than before. He could not say exactly why. The horses settled. The property had a different quality of attention in it. The kind of attention that only comes from someone who truly and deeply notices things. One evening Ethan came around the side of the barn after checking the south pasture. Stopped. Nahimana was standing at the edge of the corral. She had her hand on the nose of his oldest mare, Della. Della had been nervous and difficult since early spring. She had thrown 2 riders and refused the bit twice in a single month. Nobody had been able to do anything useful with her. Nahimana was standing with her hand on the mare's nose and talking quietly. In Apache, very softly, Della was standing like a horse standing in a warm and peaceful dream. Ethan did not move. He stood at the corner of the barn and watched them both. After a few minutes, Nahimana stepped back. She ran her hand down the mare's neck once, clean and sure. Then she turned and walked toward the house. She saw Ethan standing at the corner of the barn. She stopped for a moment. They looked at each other. He opened his mouth. He was going to say something about Della. She turned and went inside before he could put together the words. He stood there for a moment longer. Then he went to Della and offered his own hand. The mare took 1 step toward him. First time in weeks she had done that for him. He thought about what it meant that this woman could do these things so easily. He thought about what it meant that she still had not said more than a handful of words to him. He thought about what she was holding inside that silence of hers. He did not know. But he was beginning to understand. The silence was not empty at all. It was very full of things that had not yet been given a safe place to land. That evening, for the first time, Ethan tried something different at the table. He did not try to start a conversation. He did not ask her questions she was not going to answer. He just sat down and ate what she had made. He was quiet, completely and deliberately quiet. The same quality of quiet she always brought to the table with her. Something shifted in the room, not dramatically, not with any announcement. But the silence between them became a different kind of silence. Not the silence of 2 strangers who have nothing useful to share. More like the silence of 2 people listening to the same thing together. She looked at him once, briefly, when she thought he was not watching. He caught it from the corner of his eye. He did not look back at her. He kept eating. After dinner, she did not immediately go to her room. She cleared the dishes. She boiled water for fresh coffee. She poured 2 cups. She set one in front of him. She sat back down with the other cup in her hands. He looked at the cup in front of him. He looked at her. She was looking at the tabletop. But she was still sitting there. He picked up the coffee. He drank it. She drank hers. They sat in the kitchen in the cooling evening air. 2 people saying nothing and not leaving. That was the closest they had come so far. He understood that. He did not push it further than it had come on its own. He said good night when she finally rose from the table. She paused in the doorway of the bedroom. She did not turn around. But he could see from where he sat that she had stopped walking. For 2 full seconds, she stood in that doorway without moving or speaking. Then she went inside and closed the door. He sat at the table with the 2 empty coffee cups. He thought, something is changing between us, he thought. It is changing slowly. He thought slowly is fine. He was not going anywhere. He had nowhere else he wanted to be. On the 11th night, a sound woke Ethan out of sleep. Not the normal desert sounds. Not thaw insects or the horses or the wind in the sagebrush. Something else. A creak that was specific and deliberate in its placement. The sound of weight being placed very carefully on old wood by someone who did not want to be heard. He was sitting up on the sofa before he was fully conscious of being awake. He sat still and listened to the dark house around him. The candle was out. The fire was down to orange coals. Everything seemed perfectly quiet. The kind of quiet that is not actually quiet at all. The kind that is full of something being held completely still. Then the front door handle moved slowly. Ethan was on his feet before the door opened. 3 men came inside from the dark. Dirty clothes and hard faces. The smallest one had a knife already drawn and ready. The largest one held a lantern, low at his side, and looked around the kitchen. He had the particular unhurried manner of a man who has done this before and found it simple. "Good evening," he said pleasantly. "We are not here looking for trouble tonight. We just want whatever cash money you have on hand, and a couple of your horses." Maybe some of that food that has been smelling good through the window all evening. Ethan raised both hands. I don't have much cash here on the place, he said. Take whatever you need. Just don't hurt anyone. Don't hurt anyone, the big man repeated slowly. He looked around the kitchen with unhurried interest. You live out here completely alone, friend? I heard you took yourself an Apache wife somewhere. Where is she? Gone, Ethan said. Back to her people already, liar. The second man pointed at the bedroom door. There are women's clothes in that room right there. The youngest of the three, barely past 20, with genuinely scared eyes, said, Boss, we should hurry up and shut it. The leader took one slow step toward Ethan. Where is the Apache woman? Maybe she is worth considerably more to me than your horses. The fury came up in Ethan's chest fast and hot. Don't you dare. The big man drew his own knife. Tell me where she is right now or I start finding out how much you care about your face. And then something dropped from the ceiling, not fell. Dropped. Landed between Ethan and the three men with the liquid and practiced grace of something born to that movement. Both knees bent perfectly to absorb the impact. Rose in one clean motion to full upright height, Nahimana. She had been in the roof beams the entire time. A length of rope coiled in her right hand. An Apache knife on her belt where she always wore it. The three men froze for exactly 1 full second. That 1 second was all the time she needed. The rope went out flat and fast and caught the big man's ankles hard and clean. She pulled with both hands. He went down like a felled tree, his head hitting the wooden floor with a sound that put him somewhere between this world and not. The second man yelled and came at her with his knife raised. She stepped into him instead of stepping back. She caught his knife arm at the wrist. She used his own forward momentum against him completely. She drove him hard sideways straight into the kitchen table. Wood cracked. Chairs went. He landed heavily in the wreckage of the table and did not get up quickly. The third man, the youngest one, looked at his two companions on the floor. He looked at Nahimana standing in the middle of the kitchen. She was barely breathing any harder than normal. He dropped his knife. I didn't want to come here, he said. His voice broke in the middle of the sentence. They made me. I didn't, Nahimana pointed at the front door. He ran like a man who does not plan on stopping for a long time. The leader was getting back up from the floor, blood running from his nose, hatred and something very close to real fear in his eyes now. He said a word that had no place in any decent house anywhere. Nahimana took one step toward him. Just one step. The man scrambled backward on his hands and found the door. He dragged his companion out behind him. The sound of horses going south at full speed in the dark. Then nothing. Ethan was against the kitchen wall with his heart hammering, urgently. He looked at Nahimana in the low light of the overturned lantern. For the first time that he could clearly remember, something completely real was in her face. She was checking him over for damage. I'm not hurt, he said. The words came out strange. She nodded once. Then Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his vest automatically. Old habit after any kind of trouble. He sorted through the big man's dropped coin purse quickly. $2 in mixed coin. And then his hand stopped completely. A coin. Old, worn smooth by years of handling. He held it up close to the lantern. On the face of it, the stamped eagle design of a Kiowa County, Oklahoma coin. The kind not in general circulation for 8 full years. The kind that only ever moved through a handful of specific counties. The kind that had lived in a ceramic pot on his father's kitchen shelf his whole childhood. Ethan closed his fist around it slowly. He knew exactly one man operating in Arizona territory with deep roots in Kiowa County. He had not let himself say that name out loud since the letter arrived from Oklahoma. He said it now, very quietly, to no one in particular, just the name, Wade Calloway. They sat at the kitchen table. After the men were gone, both of them, 2 cups of coffee between them. The broken furniture pushed against the far wall, the night outside the windows completely and utterly still. Ethan looked at the coin lying on the table between them. He looked at the woman sitting across from him. "You were in the beams," he said. "You knew something was wrong before I woke up." She looked at her coffee and said nothing. "Nahimana," he said her name with care. "You are a warrior." She looked up at him for a moment. Then down at her cup again. "That," she said, very quietly, "is why no one wanted me." He held those words. He sat with them until the shape of them became clearer. Not all of it yet, but enough to begin to see the thing he had been missing since the Apache camp. The question was never what was wrong with her. The question was what was wrong with everyone who had seen her and walked away. "Tell me," he said. "Please. I want to understand." She looked at her cup for a long time. When she spoke, the words came slowly. Each one placed deliberately, like someone choosing careful footing on uncertain ground. "When I was 7, my mother died. My father did not know what to do with a daughter alone. My older brother Chaitan took me with him instead. Hunting, tracking, reading the land. Fighting, I was good at all of it." She stopped for a moment. "Better than good. When I was 15, the warriors began coming to ask my father for me. One by one they came, and one by one they found reasons to go." "Why?" Ethan asked. She looked at him steadily. "Because I could outride them in any race they set. I could track better than them on any trail they chose. I could fight better than most of them. An Apache man cannot stand beside a wife who makes him feel small. He cannot protect a woman who does not need protecting from anything. What would his fellow warriors say about him? What would his children think of him in time?" She looked back at the table. "So they found other reasons to give. She is too tall. Her hands are too rough. She does not smile. The real reason was always the same underneath all the others. They were afraid of what I was." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "So you learned to be smaller," he said slowly. She nodded once. "I stopped competing in anything. I stopped showing what I knew how to do. I became silent because silence is invisible. Invisible felt safe. Safe was the only thing I had left to want after a while." He looked at her across the small table. At the woman who had just taken 3 armed men off their feet in less than a minute, who had grown green things in stone ground, who had healed a horse that nobody else could touch at all, who had read an ambush from the dust marks on a desert trail. "The men in your tribe who walked away from you," he said. "They were fools," he said it plainly. Not as something kind, as a precise fact. Something moved through Nahimana's face. Something he had not seen there before. A faint and real crack in the careful surface of her expression. "My father," she said after a long moment. "He loves me. And he loves his people." He could not change their minds with words alone. "When you came, when you saved Tala, he saw an opportunity he could use. A white man would not know my reputation here, would not carry the same fixed expectations." She looked at her hands lying flat on the table. "He used us both. We both gained something from the arrangement. We both lost something from it too. That is how it went between us all." Ethan leaned back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling of the small kitchen. He thought about the ceremony at dawn. He thought about the blanket falling in the Apache camp. He thought about the look on her face. She'd said no one had ever wanted her. The way her voice had stayed level when she said that. The way a voice goes level when something has been said so many times inside that the pain has gone smooth. "Nahimana," he said. He waited until she looked at him. "The men who walked away from you were fools. I said it once already. I'll say it again, because it is the most simply true thing I have said in a long time." She looked at him across the table in the low lamplight. Long and still and measuring. Then she reached across. She placed her hand on top of his. Her palm was rough from work and warm from the coffee cup. She left it there for 3 seconds exactly. Then she drew it back to her side. "Thank you," she said. 2 words. The same 2 words she had said to him once before, in the early days. But they meant something entirely different now. Outside the kitchen window, the first pale gray of morning was just beginning. They had been sitting there the whole night without either of them noticing. Ethan looked at the window. He looked at the woman across from him. He thought, I do not know exactly what comes next for us. He thought, I am not in as much of a hurry to know as I was before. The coffee was cold. The lamp was nearly out. The day was beginning to show itself outside. Neither of them moved to leave the table. 3 more weeks passed after that night. The ranch kept changing. Not all at once, not dramatically, or all in any single day. Quietly and steadily, the way water does its work on stone over years. You do not see it happening day by day. Then one morning you look, and the stone is entirely different. The garden behind the house was producing things that had no business being there. Deep green rows of leaves getting thicker every week. Plants that no one in that county had ever named. She had found the right spacing and the right arrangement between plants. Things that made each one help the ones beside it. And the red earth behind that gray ranch house had gone green. The mare Della moved easy and sound in the corral every morning. The fences she had touched did not fail. The barn roof no longer leaked when the afternoon rains came through. The stable ceiling now had new beams put in exactly right. She had done the beam work at night while Ethan slept. He came out one morning, looked up at the ceiling, and understood. She had not wanted to be watched doing it. Word began reaching Tucson about the Miller Ranch, not the dark word Tom Harker had been spreading in the early days. Different word. The kind that travels because it is too interesting to keep to yourself. They said, the Miller woman grew things in dead soil. They said she could heal horses no one else could handle. They said the ranch had not had a fence fail since she arrived. One afternoon a woman came to the ranch on a small buckboard. She was perhaps 65 years old, broad-shouldered and gray-haired, with the weathered look of someone long settled. She introduced herself as Sarah Jenkins, from the neighboring property to the east. She had a young boy with her, perhaps 6 years old, bundled in a blanket. The child's face was flushed, deep red, and his breathing was labored and shallow. I heard about your wife, Sarah said to Ethan without any preamble. I don't care at all what anyone says about where she comes from. My grandson has had fever for 4 days running. The doctor in Tucson said, he can't do anything more for the boy. I need someone who knows about fever. Ethan looked at the woman and at the child in her arms. Come inside, he said. He found Nahimana in the garden. He did not explain at length. He told her there was a sick child in the house. She came inside without a single word. She looked at the boy for perhaps 30 seconds without touching him yet. She looked at him the way she looked at everything that mattered. With complete and focused attention, missing nothing. Then she went to her room and came back with 2 small cloth pouches. She worked at the table for nearly a full hour. She mixed things from the pouches with clean water heated over the fire. She applied a compress to the boy's forehead and to the sides of his neck. She had the child drink something in 3 small amounts, spaced apart carefully. Her movements were practiced and unhurried and exactly right, not rushed, not hesitant. They were the movements of someone who had done this many times before. Sarah sat nearby and watched everything with careful eyes. At one point, the old woman leaned forward and looked closely at Nahimana's hands. She watched the particular way those hands moved over the child's small body. She went very still. Her expression had shifted from anxious to something harder to name. Ethan noticed it from where he stood in the doorway. He said nothing. The boy fell into real sleep within the hour. The kind of sleep that means the fever is breaking through. Sarah pressed her hand to the child's forehead and felt the heat dropping. She sat back in her chair and let out a long and shaking breath. Then she looked directly at Nahimana. I need to ask you something, she said slowly. You don't have to answer if you choose not to. About a year ago, October, my son James had typhoid fever very badly. The doctor gave up on him the same way. And then one morning before sunrise, someone came. An Apache woman. She left medicine and was gone before anyone could speak to her. James survived. She stopped talking. Nahimana had gone completely still beside the table, I never saw her face clearly, Sarah continued. But I remember the way her hands moved over him. She looked at Nahimana's hands, now quiet in her lap. I have been thinking about those hands for an entire year. The kitchen went very quiet around all of them. Nahimana did not confirm what Sarah was saying. She did not deny it either. She looked at Sarah with her direct and steady gaze. Sarah looked back at her, and both women understood something that did not require words to become true. Sarah began to cry quietly. It was controlled and careful crying, the kind that comes from relief going somewhere it has been stored too long. She did not speak for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you." Nahimana looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded once, simple and complete. Ethan stood in the doorway and watched. He watched Nahimana accept that gratitude, not easily. He could see it cost her something to receive it. She was not practiced at being seen clearly by anyone, but she did not look away from Sarah's eyes. He thought, she has been doing this kind of thing for a long time. She has been doing it before dawn and disappearing, before anyone could see her face. He thought about what that says about a person. Not what is broken in them, what has been done to them over a long time. 3 days later, a buckboard came up the road that Ethan did not recognize. 2 men inside it, dressed well for the territory by any standard. Good coats, good boots, good horses. The man in front had gray hair worn clean, and a posture built from decades of certainty. He was not the kind of man who knocked gently on any door he approached. He was the kind who arrived and expected the world to arrange itself accordingly. He climbed down from the buckboard. He looked at the ranch the way a man looks at a property he is considering purchasing. Not at the house itself, at the land, at the layout, at what might lie below the surface. "Ethan Miller," he said. "That's me. My name is Wade Calloway. I'd like a few minutes of your time if you can spare them." There it was, said as simply as a bill of sale read aloud. The name that had lived in the back of Ethan's mind since the letter from Oklahoma, since the coin in the outlaw's pocket, since his brother's voice saying, "Don't go this time." Wade Calloway was standing at the gate of his property, in a good coat on a Tuesday. Ethan looked at him. He did not extend his hand. "I know who you are," Ethan said. Calloway's hand came down smoothly without any visible reaction, as if the refusal of a handshake had simply not occurred at all. "Then you know I'm a fair and careful businessman," he said. "I'm prepared to offer you considerably more than the assessed value of this land. Enough to start fresh, somewhere better suited to what you're trying to build here. I'm not selling. The water rights alone." "I know about the water," Ethan said. Something small and deliberate moved in Calloway's face, a tiny recalculation behind the eyes that showed for just a moment. "Then you understand exactly what you are sitting on here," he said, "which makes my offer considerably more generous than it might appear." He paused. "There are easier lives than the one you are building out in this place, particularly given the arrangement you've made for yourself here." His eyes moved briefly toward the house. "Life in this territory is not straightforward for a man in your particular situation." "Is that a warning?" "An observation only," Calloway said. "I am not threatening anything at all. I'm simply noting that certain choices make a man's path harder than it has to be. I am offering you a way to simplify things considerably." Ethan opened his mouth to answer him. He did not get to use it. The side door of the house opened. Nahimana walked out. She came and stood beside Ethan. Not behind him, not at any angle from him. Directly beside him, shoulder close to his shoulder. Facing Calloway, with the same calm and measuring expression, she turned on everything. No weapon visible. No display of any kind at all. Just a woman standing in her own yard, looking at a problem. Calloway looked at her. She looked back at him. Something in his practiced composure bent very slightly under that look. "Not much. Just enough to notice if you were watching carefully. This land is not for sale," she said. Her voice was quiet and completely without heat of any kind. "The water beneath it is not for sale either. The deed was filed legally and correctly, and you already know it. You have checked it yourself. She held his gaze without any effort at all. Whatever happened in Oklahoma, that was one man alone with no one beside him. This is different from that. Calloway was quiet for a moment. It doesn't have to be complicated, he said finally. His voice had lost a small but noticeable shade of its earlier warmth. It is not complicated, she said. The answer is no. Calloway looked at them both for a long and careful moment. The look of a man doing quiet arithmetic. Then he adjusted his coat and turned back toward the buckboard. He climbed up and took the reins. He looked back once before moving the horses south. He did not say anything more. But the way he left, calm and patient and entirely unhurried, was worse than anger would have been. It was the look of a man who considers this a delay, not an ending. They watched the buckboard disappear over the low rise to the south. Ethan let out a long and slow breath. Beside him, Nahimana was looking at the place where the buckboard had been. He will try again, she said. I know. Not with talk next time. I know that too. She was quiet for a moment. Then she turned to the house without hurrying. We need to talk to my father. That evening, Nahimana built a small fire in the yard. She did not ask Ethan to join her. But she did not turn away when he came and sat nearby on the porch step. The fire was small and low, more for thinking than for warmth. She sat close to it and looked south, toward the Apache lands lying in the dark. She was quiet for a long time. Ethan sat on the step and did not fill the silence. He had learned that her silences were working silences, things being decided inside them. Talking over them would not help anything. After a while she said, without turning toward him, You said the coin was from Kiowa County. Yes. Your brother's county. Yes. Calloway took your brother's land. He arranged it, Ethan said. He doesn't do those things directly himself. She was quiet again. In my people's way, she said after a while, when a man steals from a family, the debt does not end. It ends only when the family is restored, or the thief is fully gone, not punished, gone, out of reach. That is the only real ending to it. That's not far from how I think about it, Ethan said. She looked over at him. What do you want from all of this, Ethan? The first time she had said his name alone like that, by itself. He sat with it for a moment before answering. I want him unable to do this again, Ethan said. Not to me, not to anyone else he has his eye on right now. I want the debt paid in a way that actually holds. She turned back to the fire. Then we need help, she said. Your father. Yes. He will come if you ask him? She looked at the fire for a long time. When she answered, her voice was careful and considered. He owes me that much, and he knows it. She sent word the following morning. A rider appeared at the edge of the property before noon. She spoke to him briefly in Apache. He rode south without stopping. Ethan watched from the barn. He did not ask how it worked exactly. He had enough evidence by now to trust most of what she did. 2 mornings later, Nahimana appeared in the barn doorway. Riders coming, she said. From the west, he came out and stood beside her. The afternoon light was turning the red rock of the western ridge the color of burning coal. Silhouettes appeared along the top of the ridge. Not 2 or 3 riders. 12. Moving down toward the war ranch in a single deliberate line. The kind of line that has real purpose in it. At the front rode Chaska on his gray horse. Beside him rode Chayton. Behind them, on a spotted horse moving carefully, rode an old man Ethan had not seen before. Very old. Moving with the careful economy of someone who has learned exactly what each motion costs. He would learn the old man's name later. Makia. He would learn what Makia had witnessed once, very long ago. He did not know any of that yet. He only knew that what was coming down off that ridge felt significant. The way you feel weather coming before it actually arrives. Ready? He said to Nahimana. She was looking at her father riding down the slope toward her. Her father who had bound her wrists to a stranger's wrists at dawn. Her father who had loved her and still could not protect her. I have been ready, she said quietly, for a very long time. The Apache riders came down off the ridge in the long red afternoon light. Ethan stood at the gate with his rifle on his shoulder, not raised. But there, because it seemed right to be holding something, Nahimana stood beside him, her arms at her sides, her face calm. She did not reach for her knife. Chaska pulled up 20 feet out. He looked at his daughter for a long moment before he looked at Ethan. Then he looked at the ranch, at the green garden behind it, at the repaired fences, at the smoke from the chimney, at the quality of a place being genuinely understood by someone who cares. He dismounted. "Father," Nahimana said, "daughter." He walked toward her and hopped 2 steps short. He looked at her face the way a man looks at something he is worried about from far away, trying to read it now that it is close enough to read honestly. "The stories that reached us," he said. "An Apache healer working in the white man's county. A woman guarding her home like a warrior." He paused. "I needed to see it for myself, and what do you see?" He was quiet for a moment. "I see you standing in your own yard," he said finally. Without apology, something shifted in Nahimana's posture. Barely visible. But Ethan caught it. A millimeter of something held very tight, beginning to release. Chaitin came forward and gripped his sister's arm in greeting. Then he turned and looked at Ethan with direct and assessing eyes. "You have kept her safe," he said. Ethan almost said she had kept them both safe, which was the accurate account. He said instead, "We have kept each other. That's the truth of it." Chaitin held his gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. The nod of a man granting something he has thought about carefully. They gathered inside the house. Ethan laid out everything he knew about Wade Calloway. The land in Oklahoma, and what Calloway did there. The coin from Kiowa County. Both visits to the ranch and what was said. The underground water source, and what it was worth to a man like Calloway. The kind of man who moved through territories, buying what lay under other people's lives. Chaska listened without interrupting at any point. When Ethan finished, Chaska said, "This man has done this before." "Yes. He will do it again in other places after this. Unless something changes that makes it harder," Ethan said. Chaska looked at his daughter. "What do you propose?" Chaitin spoke. "The Apache people and this ranch share the same water source beneath the ground. What threatens one threatens both of us. Calloway cannot take what belongs to 2 separate parties at once. Not without making enemies of both parties." I simultaneously, he looked at Ethan. "Alone, you are one man on one piece of land. Together, this becomes something with a different kind of weight to it. A line he cannot cross without starting something larger than any land deal." "Yeah," Ethan said. "Exactly that." They talked for another full hour. Practical and careful work. Who would be where and when? How word would travel fast if Calloway moved again. What the arrangement looked like in terms a land office could understand. By the end of it, there was a plan with real weight behind it. But that was not what Ethan would remember most from that afternoon. A warrior from Chaska's group had a cut on his forearm from the rocky trail. Nothing serious, but not cleaned properly. Nahimana had noticed it when they arrived. She took him to the flat stone outside and cleaned the wound. She applied the green paste from her pouch. Old Makia was sitting near the edge of the garden, watching everything. He was very old and moved slowly and did not speak much. He had the stillness of a man who has said most of what he needs to say in this life. Content now, mostly to watch what is happening around him. He watched Nahimana's hands work on the warrior's arm. Each motion deliberate, nothing wasted. The work of someone who has done this a very long time. Makia leaned forward on his walking stick. His lips moved. He said something barely above a breath. 2 words. In Apache. Said to no one in particular in the yard. Ethan heard them but did not understand what they meant. He asked Nahimana later. She was quiet for a moment before she translated. The old man had said, Ayana's hands, Nahimana's hands stilled on the warrior's arm for just one moment. Then she continued working without looking up. She did not look at Makia, but her jaw had tightened with the effort of holding something carefully. Chaska, standing nearby, had heard it too. He looked at his daughter for a long moment. He said nothing. Not yet. Later that evening, Chaitan found Ethan near the corral. The warrior was checking the hooves of his horse, the automatic care of a man who has traveled hard distances. They stood together in the quiet that builds between men who are learning each other. After a while, Chaitan said, "Calloway is not finished with you. I know. He will try something before he leaves for good. Something that costs you, even if he cannot take everything." He set the horse's hoof down and straightened. "A man like that does not lose with any grace at all. What do you think he'll do? What men like that do when talking fails them. Something indirect. Something to show you the length of his reach from a distance. The water is what he wants. He may try to damage what he cannot take from you." Ethan nodded. He had been thinking the same thing. Chaitan looked at him directly. "My sister said you stood in the yard and did not step back when he came. She stood beside me. She said that too." Something in Chaitan's expression moved. Not quite a smile, but very near one. "She has not had someone stand beside her in a very long time." He turned back to the horse. "Do not stop doing that." Ethan looked toward the house. Lamplight in the kitchen window. The shape of Nahimana moving inside it. "I don't plan to," he said. That evening, Nahimana built her small fire in the yard again. Ethan sat nearby on the step and did not fill the silence. He let the quiet settle around them. He looked at the stars coming out above the desert in their numbers. After a while, she said, "Calloway mentioned Oklahoma. He used the name of your county. You went very still when he said it." "Yes. Tell me about your brother," she said. He looked at the coals. "We argued the last time we spoke," he said. "I picked up my bag and walked out, the way I always did when things got difficult." He called after me from the porch. He stopped. "Don't go this time." That's what he said. I went, paused. 3 weeks later, a letter reached me in Tucson. Calloway's arrangement had gone the way those things go. My brother was there alone to defend the land. I was not there. Nahimana was quiet. After a moment, she said, "My mother had people like that too. People who wanted what she carried, but could not take it with any deed or legal paper, so they took it a different way." He looked at her. "Tell me about your mother," he said. She watched the fire for a moment. "Her name was Ayanna," she said. She said it the way a word is said that has not been said aloud in a long time. She was a healer, the best the tribe had known in many years. She understood plants and medicine, that the men who called themselves healers did not know, and would not admit they did not know. She stopped. They called her dangerous. They called what she did other names that were not true. They could not take away her ability, so they took away her name. "What do you mean?" Ethan said quietly. "When she died, the council decided she should not be remembered or spoken of. My father agreed, because he was chief and the council was against him. There are things even a chief cannot fight alone against." She looked at the fire. "So I grew up knowing my mother's hands and my mother knowledged, and not being allowed to say where either of them came from. The fire was very low. The stars above them were enormous." "Tonight, Makia said Ayanna's hands," Ethan said. "Yes." He said, "Your mother's name." "Yes." He looked at the profile of her face in the firelight. She was holding all of this with tremendous care, the way a person holds something that has been put down wrong for years, being very slowly and carefully lifted back to where it belongs. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what was done to her and to you." She did not answer right away. "My father knows what it cost," she said finally. "He has known it for a long time." She looked up at the stars. "I used to say her name only inside my own head," she said. "Only at night, when no one could hear me say it." "You can say it out loud now," he said. "Here. Whenever you want." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said it. Once, clear and without hesitation, "Ayanna." The name went out into the desert air. The desert held it without judgment, without any hurry, simply receiving it. Ethan sat beside her and said nothing. He did not need to. The trouble came before sunrise, the way Chaitan had said it would. Ethan was in that half state between sleep and waking when the smell reached him, not from the fireplace. Chemical and wrong, coming from somewhere outside, He was pulling on his boots before he was fully awake. He followed the smell to the upper channel of the water system, the ditch that carried the underground source water to the garden and the troughs. A short section of it was wrong. He could see it in the surface color of the water and smell it clearly from a foot away. Someone had poured something into the channel during the night. Not enough to poison the deep source below. Enough to foul this section. Enough to leave a mark on the way out. Nahimana was already crouching at the edge of the fouled section when he arrived. He had not heard her pass him in the dark house. She had not made a sound crossing the yard. She was simply already there. She examined the fouled section for perhaps 30 seconds. Then she rose and went back to the house. She returned with 3 pouches and a sealed clay jar of clean water. No questions asked. No time spent explaining anything. She began working methodically through the fouled section, mixing from the pouches, pouring into the channel at specific intervals, beginning to flush the contamination through carefully. "What can I do?" Ethan said. She pointed without looking up. "The eastern trench. Dig it 6 inches deeper than it is now. Redirect the flow away from this section until it runs clean. Start at the stone marker and work east." He found the shovel and went to work. The sky was still black above the desert, lit only by stars in their thousands. The air before dawn in Arizona was the kind of cold that surprises people. Real cold that the days burn away by mid-morning without leaving a trace. He dug by lantern light with frost on the handle of the shovel. She worked in the dark alongside him. No lantern needed. She moved along the channel by touch and instinct, and the knowledge she had built of this ground, knowledge built quietly over the weeks since she arrived here. They worked for nearly 2 hours together. His shoulders ached from the digging. The trench ran 30 feet before he reached the stone marker and redirected the flow. He tested the clean water at the new inlet. It ran clear and without smell. He set down the shovel. Nahimana tested the channel at 3 separate points. She ran water through her fingers. She smelled it. She tasted a drop with care. She straightened. "It is acceptable now," she said. He looked at his hands in the growing gray light. Red mud to the elbows. He looked at hers, exactly the same. The sky to the east was going pale at its edge, a thin line of pink along the top of the eastern ridge. The beginning of a new day showing itself. He looked at her. She looked at him. 2 people at the edge of a water channel before sunrise, both of them muddy and tired, having fixed together what neither one could have fixed alone. He did not plan what he said next. He did not choose it carefully or prepare it. It was simply the truest thing that was available to say right then. "I love you," he said, sibilant, direct, the way he said true things when he said them. No ceremony around it, no announcement. A fact that had been building for some time, ready now to be said out loud in the cold gray before dawn. Nahimana looked at him. The gray morning was coming up slowly behind her. The desert was filling with its first pale colors. She stood at the edge of the repaired channel with mud on her hands. Her straight back, those extraordinary eyes. The eyes that had found him unremarkable on the first day, that had been revising that assessment steadily and quietly every day since. "That is the first time," she said, very quietly, "that anyone has ever said that to me." "I know," he said. "That is a wrong that needed correcting." Something moved through her face then. Not the small and careful almost smiles he had seen occasionally before. Something full and real, a warmth that started deep in her eyes and changed everything below them. She reached out. She took his hand, not gently, firmly. The grip of someone who intends to hold on and means it. He held on just as tight. That morning, Chaska asked to speak with Nahimana alone. They sat together in the shade of the barn, father and daughter. The rest of the group moved around them at a careful and respectful distance. Ethan watched from the far side of the corral fence. He did not go close enough to hear any of it. He did not want to. He watched Chaska talk for a while. He saw Nahimana listen. He saw her answer once, with something carefully considered. Then he saw Chaska do something he had not expected. The old chief bowed his head. Just briefly, a small and controlled movement. Like a man settling a debt that has been owed for a long time, Ethan looked away and gave them their moment. Later, when the Apache prepared to leave, Chaska came to where Ethan stood. "My daughter," he said. "Yes. She is different here." Ethan thought about the word different carefully. "She is the same," he said. "Exactly who she has always been. The circumstances are different. She can be herself here without apology." Chaska looked at him with those still and measuring eyes. Then something eased in the weathered face. "Yes," he said. That is the correct way to say it." He extended his hand. Ethan took it. "Calloway will not return," Chaska said quietly. He said it the way a man states a fact he is certain of. He calculated wrong. He thought he was dealing with one man on one piece of land. He did not account for what that land sits beside. He paused. Word has gone out through the right places. Other arrangements he was pursuing have become difficult for him. He will go somewhere else where the arithmetic is simpler. Will that hold long enough? Long enough, Chaska said. Long enough for it not to matter anymore. He walked back toward his horse. Just before they all mounted to ride, old Makya moved toward Nahimana, slow and deliberate. Everyone gave him the space his age had rightfully earned. He stopped before her and looked at her face. Then he looked at her hands. He said something in Apache that Ethan could not follow. He asked Nahimana later. She translated it word by careful word. Makya had said, "Your mother's hands healed what they touched. Your hands do the same." This should have been said aloud a long time before now. Then Makya had turned to Chaska and said one word, the name. Ayana said clearly and in the open air of the yard, said in front of the warriors standing there, said in front of Chaitan, said in front of Ethan, without hesitation, without any apology. The way a name deserves to be said in the world. Chaska closed his eyes for one moment. Then he opened them. He looked at his daughter standing in her own yard. He said it too. Ayana would be proud of you. Nahimana stood in the yard of the ranch she had arrived at as a complete stranger. Standing in the full morning light of the Arizona desert, red and ancient and indifferent to all small things, she stood in the middle of it, and did not make herself smaller. She let the name reach her. She let it fill whatever space it needed. Then Tala came running, the girl from the dry canyon. She had been holding herself at the edge of the group all morning. She ran across the open yard and grabbed Nahimana hard around the waist. She held on with everything her small arms had in them. Nahimana put both arms around the child. She held on just as hard. Ethan stood at the gate and watched. He thought about the day he had found Tala in the canyon, how she had grabbed his shirt with both fists, how he had been unable to put her down. He thought about where that day had brought him. He thought, "It has brought me somewhere good." The Apache riders crested the ridge one by one and disappeared over it. Chaska laughed. He looked back once from the top of the rise. He looked at the small ranch below him, at the green garden behind it, at the two people standing at the gate. Then he turned his horse south and was gone into the desert. Ethan and Nahimana stood together in the quiet that follows something large. The desert held all its sounds at once. Insects and wind and a hawk very high above. Luther moved in the corral behind them. The garden stood green in the morning light. He said her name, Nahimana said. He did, in front of everyone there. Yes. She was looking at the ridge where the riders had gone. Her face was calm, and she was not going to cry. He could see that clearly. But something in her jaw was working through something large and real. He did not speak. He had learned that there were kinds of quiet worth protecting completely. After a while, she said very softly, "I used to say her name only inside my own head. Only at night, when no one could possibly hear me say it. You can say it out loud now," he said. "Here, whenever you want." She was quiet for a moment longer. Then she said it. Once. Clear as water over stone. Ayana. The desert held the name. Without judgment. Without urgency. simply receiving it the way open places receive things. They stood together for a while longer. That afternoon, Chaitan's prediction proved itself true, not with drama, with the quiet efficiency of a man leaving a mark before he goes for good. A section of the water channel smelled wrong when Nahimana checked it. A small amount of fouling. Not the source, just a surface section. Enough to cost them an evening of work. Enough to leave one fingerprint on the way out the door. Calloway's fingerprint. They fixed it the way they had fixed the problem before dawn. Side by side. She mixing and treating. Him digging and redirecting. The same work in the evening light. When it was done, Ethan leaned on the shovel and looked at the clean channel. "That's the last of him," he said. "Probably," she said. "But he will not be the last man with that kind of want." She looked at the land around them. "There will always be men like that, and we will always have work to do," she said. She said it plainly. No drama. Just the understanding of someone who has known this a long time. He looked at her in the evening light. Red and long. Across the desert, lighting her face from the west. Nahimana. She looked at him. "I know I said yes to your father's offer because the route home was shorter," he said. "I want you to know that is not what holds me here." She waited. "You do," he said. "Everything you are. Everything I have watched you do. Everything I have not yet seen." He paused. "I would have found longer routes. Every longer route in the territory. If it meant not being here with you." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned and picked up her tools and walked toward the house just before she reached porch steps. She stopped. She did not turn around, but she stopped. She stood there for 2 full seconds. Then she went inside. He stood at the water channel with the shovel in his hands. He looked at the door she had gone through. Then he set down the shovel and followed her home. That evening they sat together on the porch steps. The sun was going down behind the western ridge. Those colors that only Arizona produces in the evening. Deep red and layered orange, and a purple that begins where the orange stops. Colors that do not have proper names in any language he knew. Nahimana had her hands in her lap. He was close enough that their shoulders were touching. "You said it this morning," she said. "Before the sun came up, while we were both covered in mud, I did. It was not a particularly good moment," she said. "No," he agreed. "It was not." She thought about this for a moment. "It was the right moment," she said. "I thought so." She turned and looked at him. The expression he had learned. The one where the calculation behind her eyes is running its final numbers. "Where something is being decided, I do not say things I do not mean," she said. "I know that. So when I say something to you, you can be certain it is true. I know that too." She held his gaze. "I love you," she's straightforward, unadorned. The way she said every true thing in her life. No ceremony around it. No hesitation. "I have loved you since the night in the kitchen," she said. "When you sat down and listened to all of it, and did not flinch, and said the men who walked away were fools." She paused. "No one had ever said that to me before that night." He looked out at the desert, at the long evening light lying across the red rock, at the garden she had grown from nothing at all, at the fences that had not failed since her hands had touched them. "We made a bad start," he said. "Yes, considering how it is now," she almost smiled. "Yes, I'd do it the same way again," he said. "Every part of it." She was quiet for a while. She looked at the sky darkening in the east. She looked at the first star appearing. "So would I," she said. They sat on those steps for a long time after that. The desert filled with its evening sounds around them. Insects and wind and the first coyotes starting up somewhere south. The horses moved in the corral. The garden stood in the last of the light. After a while she said, "I was afraid of this." "Of what of this?" She gestured at the space between them. Small motion, precise. "Of someone seeing me clearly and still staying. I did not know what to do with that." "And now?" he asked. She looked at him. "I am learning," she said. He nodded. They sat. The stars came out over the desert in their full numbers. The kind of night sky that makes a person feel both small and held at once. After a long quiet, she said it again, not explaining, not answering anything. Just practicing. Ayana, into the night air, into the wide desert, into the world. He sat beside her and listened. He thought, this is what the right question sounds like. Not what is wrong with her, not what needs fixing, or explaining, or excusing. What is her mother's name? That was the right question all along. And he had found the answer. And the answer was Ayana. And Ayana's hands were in the world again. There is not much more to say. Not because the story ends there on that porch. Stories like this one do not end exactly. They settle. Like dust after a long journey. Like good fire going to coals. They settle into the shape of a life. Calloway moved his operations east the following spring. The arrangements in Arizona Territory had become complicated for him. The kind of complicated that money alone cannot make simple. Word had gone out through the right places and in the right directions. Other purchases he had been pursuing became difficult without explanation. He went somewhere else, where the land was different and the arithmetic was simpler. Nobody in the county missed him. Not even Tom Harker. Speaking of Tom Harker, he brought the chain back on a Tuesday morning in October. He tied his mare at the post and knocked. When Ethan came to the door, Tom stood with his hat in his hands. "I hear the mare is walking sound," he said. "Thought I'd let you know I appreciate it." He did not say anything more specific than that. He did not need to. Ethan made coffee, and they drank it at the table. Nahimana nodded at Tom when she passed through. He nodded back. No speech was made. No apology given directly. That was the work of settling things, and it was enough. The garden grew into the following spring. Then the spring after that. By the third year, people came from a fair distance to ask about it. What she grew, and how she grew it, and whether she would look at something ailing. She answered in her careful and exact way. Never more words than necessary. Always exactly the right ones. The reputation of the Miller Ranch healer spread quietly through the county, not loudly, quietly. The way things that are real tend to spread. Chaska visited twice every year. He came without much announcement and stayed a few days each time. He and Ethan developed a way of talking that was mostly practical. The chief taught Ethan things about reading weather in the shape of clouds and wind. Ethan taught the chief about negotiating a fair price with a dishonest supply merchant. Neither of them mentioned the ceremony at dawn in the Apache camp. Not once. Neither of them needed to. Chayton came when the distances allowed it. There was something different in how he looked at Ethan over the years. Something that acknowledged, without naming what it was acknowledging. Something satisfied. Old Makia died the winter after that first visit. Peacefully and in his sleep the way the very old sometimes do. The news came with a rider in February. Nahimana sat quietly for the full evening after the rider came and went. Ethan sat beside her. They did not say much. That was sufficient. The ranch got a second room added in the first winter. A proper one with a window facing east, because she liked to see the dawn from inside the house. He had noticed that about her. Without being asked to notice, without being told, he had simply watched long enough to learn. The stable got new beams that following spring. Using the technique she had shown him, the one she had known from the very first day she walked in and looked up. He had not asked her to teach it to him. He had simply watched carefully and long enough on clear nights. They sat on the porch steps together. She told him what the stars meant in the Apache way of understanding them, what each constellation was called and what story it carried. He told her things that were useful in town and in dealing with the world. How to read a bill of sale for what it was hiding in its smaller print. How to argue a price with a man who has already decided to take advantage. How to make coffee strong enough to be genuinely worth drinking. Some nights they did not talk at all. In those years in that part of Arizona Territory, people sometimes asked about the Miller Ranch, about the woman there, the Apache healer who could grow things in dead soil, who could read a trail from 3 days back, who had made things difficult for a particular land speculator in ways nobody ever fully explained. People had different versions of how she and Ethan had come to be together. Most were wrong in the specific details. Most were right about the part that mattered. It had been unlikely at the start. It had held. The ones who asked Ethan directly got the same answer every time. He would pause. He would think about it honestly. Then he would say it the way a man says a thing he has turned over long enough to know the true shape of it. "She saved my life," he would say. More than once, in more than one way. Then he would go back to what he was doing, which was usually something she had already started. There is one more thing worth saying. In those early days, Ethan had carried a question with him everywhere he went. What is wrong with her? He ran it over and over. He turned it in his hands. He could not put it down. The answer was nothing. Nothing was wrong with her. Nothing had ever been wrong with her. What was wrong was always somewhere else, in the men who had walked away, in the tradition that had silenced a healer's name, in a world that had not yet learned to hold what she was. That world did not change in any large or sudden way. It does not do that. But in one small ranch in Arizona territory, on the edge of the desert and the edge of two different worlds, something different happened. Two people looked at each other across a rough-hewn kitchen table and kept looking. And what they found was worth the looking.